So we're going to look at a new system now for the way to manage batteries. So pleased to take us through this one. Welcome the Senior Sustainability Manager at the Cobalt Institute, Tom Fairlie. Tom.
Thanks very much, Sasha. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our last session of today, Making the Journey to Sustainable Batteries with Digital Product Passports. I guess well done for making it this far in the Congress. We've got the last panel. Hopefully it'll be a lively one. So I'm just going to invite my panelists onto the stage now. We'll start with Anne-Marie Fleury, Responsible Sourcing Director at Glencore. Hiro Hayakawa, the General Manager of Raw Materials Procurement at Tanaka Chemical Company. Aloysius Lim, Client Partner for APAC at Circulor, and Pavel Tsedenov, CEO of Resource. So I think a round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you.
Can you sit anywhere?
You can sit anywhere. We can confuse everyone a little bit with our seating. Yes, why not? So we're going to start the session with each of the panelists making opening remarks for 4 or 5 minutes about their position in the value chain and their exposure to battery passports. And then we'll have a discussion to explore how battery passports will impact them and sustainability goals. And at the end of the session, there'll be an opportunity for questions. So look out for the roving mic there. I think it's not been possible to talk about batteries in the past few years, and particularly EV batteries, without making reference to the EU battery regulation and, of course, battery passports, digital product passport solutions which offer verification frameworks for the underlying regulation. So here we see a digital twin for each battery with key data on performance, material sourcing, environmental impact, and so on. And whilst the battery passport itself will be the responsibility of the economic operator, whoever that might be, so it might be the OEM, the car manufacturer, or perhaps a battery cell manufacturer, the impact of these requirements will be felt on the full value chain in the form of, say, traceability, due diligence, sharing of information, and so on. So it should be noted, of course, that digital product passports are nothing new. And indeed, in 2018, China passed the Interim Provisions on Traceability Management of Power Recycling in New Energy Vehicles, a classic regulation title. But this requirement had traceability. It was looking at collecting data on batteries with this focus on recycling and circular economy. And now in 2025, here we are with the EU battery regulation still not fully in place, and it really shows how much work still needs to be done in the EU. So as with the Chinese provisions, where the focus was on circular economy and recycling, the EU battery regulation, battery passport, has a focus on sustainability, in particular carbon footprint, recycled content, and sets minimum requirements for traceability, which supports due diligence. But with these ambitious requirements in place and this focus on sustainability reporting, I guess the question is like how ready is the value chain? Will the battery passport actually achieve what it aims to set out as well? I would say, as a reflection generally, it's quite heartening to have seen in the conversations on stage and the conversations around this Congress, highlighting the importance of ESG and sustainability and the importance to companies that we continue on this path, regardless of the change in political rhetoric that we've all sort of seen in the past few years. But I guess, getting back to the passports, is how will commercial realities impact these high aspirations when it comes to things like sharing data? So what does good look like? How will we achieve it? And when will we achieve it by? So I guess we'll start with our opening remarks, and Anne-Marie, I'll start with you. So maybe give us some reflections on Glencore and where you sit in the value chain and how battery passports are going to impact you and your perspectives on those impacts and traceability and so on.
Great, thank you, Tom, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this discussion today. My name is Anne-Marie Fleury. I am Responsible Sourcing Director for Cobalt and Lithium at Glencore. Glencore is an upstream company, a producer, but also a trader of third-party material. and a recycler, actually, and refiner. Quite a big group, 32 different commodities. So I can't pretend to be able to answer every question about Glencore. But I do know a bit about the cobalt part. My particular role is responsible sourcing, as my title says. So a big part of what I do is, as a producer, responding to our clients on their due diligence requirements. And then also in our capacity as a third-party trader, we ourselves are the clients sometimes. So we have our own due diligence requirements for suppliers that we need for ourselves and our process, and also pass on to our clients after us. So firmly upstream, but not always at the origin, I would say, is where we are. Maybe one point I want to make as an upstream player is obviously we have a lot of visibility and controls on the origin of the material and the conditions under which it was produced, and a lot of leverage, and also understanding things like the carbon footprint and the recycled content, and the ESG factors. And this is information in my day-to-day job that I am often sharing with our clients. So it's a very tangible part of my day-to-day work. That said, we're just one part of the whole supply chain, and a passport really encapsulates this concept of every stage of the supply chain participating in something that ultimately should be a package of information related to an end product. So we only have the visibility on the upstream part.
Absolutely, but interesting that in that trading arm also you have your own due diligence that you need to do, and yeah. So I'll move on to Hiro, and I'm glad we have you here because I think the midstream sort of gets overlooked quite often, but actually perhaps a crucial point in the value chain, bridging that gap between producing companies and perhaps battery manufacturers as well.
Yeah, well, not just bridging the gap, but probably this line between those guys and ourselves in the industry. But well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor for me to be here. The hard work of the institute, people, organizers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hiro Hayakawa from Tanaka Chemical. Tanaka Chemical is a Japanese battery precursor manufacturer, or PCAM, production. So that basically goes into either EV itself or the hybrid system. We are now producing capacity-wise 50,000 ton under the name of Sumitomo Corporation, Sumitomo Chemicals organizations. But the headwinds in the industry, we were kind of, from utilization point of view, halfway through. So we are trying to optimize every steps to achieve that in the next, hopefully, 2 to 3 years. I mean, probably everyone here agree that the delay, in a way, of the demand outlook in the EVs are in the range of 2 to 3 years. So that's how we also view the market. Now, today, the battery passport, or the traceability, traceability anyway, as she says, is a vital part of our day-to-day business, for our operation. Not just in battery, but from my previous engagement in variety of industries, like aerospace, aviation, or the healthcare, the traceability related to like manufacturing, quality control, processes, and to some extent ESG related information. That's very, very important part of traceability. And that exchange of information is diligently and regularly done amongst the parties involved in an extreme confidentiality manner. So we are doing that already. Now, passport. Before coming here, I was talking to my colleague and going through the potential questions that Tom is going to ask. First comment from my marketing team management was, Hiro, what is this? Is this a dream or a goal? And I wasn't able to answer to that. I mean, we will discuss that, whether it's dream or goal, but it should be a goal. I mean, Japanese don't want to argue, so we want to be very diplomatic. So we have to think about to make this happen. But we have to admit there are so many challenges, in this, because we are already doing the traceability issue, but now what we are trying to do is adding something on top of that, under the name of, battery passport. If a battery is given an identity, ID or passport or whatever you want to call, and if that particular battery is processed through the same processes, using the same raw materials, it's going to be simple. But life is not that simple these days. Under the name of risk management, people are looking for supply chain these days are required for the multiple sources, multiple routes. So same battery end up numerous number of raw materials, processes, sources. So we end up with fishbone-like matrix of information. And how do we control that? And in the end, is this the goal? I don't know. Maybe yes. And also, is this an achievable goal? I don't know. Maybe yes. And is this something that supply chain participants want? I don't know. Maybe yes. So all these need to be answered. And for doing that, standardization is needed, security of information for the particular people is needed. All those things need to be addressed and considered. So I think that's why we are here today to discuss. I know European Union has a very challenging, timeline setting up certain things. Do we have enough time? I don't know. But let's get together to think about it. If we can do it, if cannot, we have to think about something else. But we are today here to discuss on that. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent framing for the session. Is this a dream or a goal? I guess. Let's see. Maybe we can try and get some answers today to make it more of a goal. So moving on to Aloysius. So one of the traceability providers we have here today, and perhaps you can reflect on what you've heard so far from upstream and midstream, say a little bit about what you do, and maybe we can start to explore some of those challenges, and that can be a starting point for some further conversations.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tom. I was thinking about this just now. It was between me and Pavel. If Pavel had sat here, he would have taken most of that question first. And I'm
very lucky.
First of all, thanks so much for having me here, having us here. I think Emery and Takahiro-san kind of laid a really wide context to this. So I guess first to explain where Circulor comes into this. So I'm Aloysius Lim from Circulor. I'm the client partner / commercial director looking after Asia Pacific. So Circulor is a UK headquartered company. We are a traceability solutions provider at our core. So what we do is we provide the technology platform to enable the economic operators, as what Tom has kind of explained earlier, to enable traceability across their supply chain. So our role, we don't participate in the supply chain ourselves, but we help to connect the supply chain, help to connect the participants within the supply chain to share information so that the economic operator or the most downstream customers have enough information to satisfy that they have met the various regulatory requirements. Now, so a lot of the work that we do is primarily driven by regulation, but increasingly it's also centered around trade facilitation, i.e. enabling imports into, I guess the most hot topic these days is how do we enable the trade facilitation between the rest of the world to the US, driven by some of the requirements for proving that there's no use of forced labor within the supply chain. So how traceability enables that is to help the end user satisfy to the end manufacturer satisfy to the regulators or end users that they are doing what they can within their means to source responsibly, especially with relation to some of the more critical materials of critical concern in the upstream supply chains. So I guess where we come in is, from my perspective, I've obviously been involved with the onboarding of the entire supply chain. So we do understand the requirements and asks from the downstream, the OEMs, the cell producers. But we also, in the process of onboarding the midstreams and the upstreams, understand their challenges as well. So like what Takahiro-san said, the challenges with midstreams tends to be things around data security, data confidentiality. It also tends to be around the scale, because, and this will be something that I believe will be defined within the implementation guidelines of the EU battery regulation. If you actually do a 2D mapping of a raw material supply chain, whether it's NCM or LFP, you will notice that the supply chain actually branches out at the PChem side of things. Because if you talk about just the 4 critical materials, cobalt, nickel, natural graphite, and lithium, 3 of those are either sourced directly or the materials goes directly into the PChem. So that's where they are kind of a designated control point. From their perspective, they have to consider the responsible sourcing obligations from their immediate upstream. Either it's cobalt sulfate, cobalt hydroxide, nickel sulfate, nickel hydroxide, lithium hydroxide, so on and so forth. And then when you go to upstream, a lot of the challenges centers around, again, data confidentiality, the availability and the availability of data, as well as, I guess, this is the part where I guess Emery can, and Pavel can add a bit more context. Within the mining space, it is not, the landscape is sometimes, there's a confluence between the political situation as well as the commercial realities of it. So it's never a straightforward whether I can share data or not. It tends to be muddied between whether, for example, the local regulators allow it, so on and so forth. So I guess, long way to answer a short question, Tom. I think it's a fascinating landscape. You have the OEMs, the downstreams who have their obligations to the customers and the regulators. You have the midstreams who act as a control point to a fairly diverse and complex landscape in the upstream world. So, hopefully this gives everyone a lay of the land as to the different concerns and considerations across the entire supply chain. And where we come in as a technology provider is we try to be that neutral, independent third-party provider, so that whether you are a midstream, a refiner based in China, a midstream PChem producer in Korea, up to OEM, a cell produced in one of the gigafactories and then assembled in the factories in Europe and sent to the customers, you have a standardized way of collecting data that can be independently verified by what will be later then be known as the notified bodies. Mm-hmm. And that helps you deliver a consistent messaging and platform to your suppliers and the regulators. Yeah.
Thanks. Really highlighting the complexity, I think, and a bit of the challenge ahead. Pavel, so I think you've heard a number of points already. I would be interested to hear your reflections on the challenges, but also about what Resource is doing. And I know you've been looking at the Cobalt value chain in a bit more detail as well, so perhaps explaining on that as well would be great to hear. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for inviting and for this interesting discussion. Resource is a traceability platform. Thanks to Aloysius, he already explained the basics of how it works, what we're trying to achieve, and how do we operate. I think the important distinction is that we are backed by the upstream industry. Resource was founded by the major critical minerals miners and traders, Glencore, CMOG, and the Eurasian Group. So over the years, we had a lot of experience in understanding how regulatory requirements are translated to the practicalities of the operations in the upstream, in the downstream. We participated in development of the EU battery regulation together with the Global Battery Alliance, and currently involved in both US and the Chinese battery passport development. So on the commercial side, I think Aloysius already highlighted what are the main challenges, how data sharing, confidentiality is very important, how the scope of data that is being shared is very important. And I would like to stop maybe at two other types of challenges, which are technological and regulatory. On the technological side, there are two approaches to traceability. You can either try to do a physical traceability, or you can try to build a chain of custody. And the reality of the industry is that implementing physical traceability is hard. We experimented with GPS tracking, RFIDs, blockchain. Industry went through the different waves of flavors of the month for the technology, let's say. And what I've seen is that during the high stress periods, COVID or supply crunch, sometimes it takes up to 12 months for material to travel from the mine to the battery. And given that some downstream and midstream players currently opt for short-term contracts, sometimes contracts are already fulfilled while material is still in progress, and you're losing the commercial leverage on how to work, how to interact, how to engage the suppliers in the supply chain. While on the chain of custody side of things, information sharing and building a chain of custody is more or less solved from the technological standpoint. There are already established practices. I'm sure Anne-Marie could share her work on how Glencore, for example, already built process to connect and to provide information required for responsible sourcing due diligence. Right? So on the technological side, on the technological challenges, my takeaway is there are two approaches, and physical is hard. And we can talk about this in more details. On the regulatory side, there are connected issues about the regulatory intent and what's the objective of the regulation. Because sometimes even within one region, for example, European battery regulation, there are conflicting priorities within one single regulation. Take, for example, responsible sourcing due diligence and then recycled content guidance. There are two different regulatory intents. For the recycled content, the intent is to raise the average level of recycled content. And there are various mechanisms to incentivize. There are targets for recycled content, and there are mechanisms on how to measure and how to calculate the recycled content. There are drafts being circulated on how companies could use credits to boost recycled content per specific batches. On the other hand, on the responsible sourcing due diligence requirements, the intent is to make sure that all of the material that end up in a battery was sourced responsibly. And all the industry is eagerly waiting for due diligence guidelines. And that's where I see challenges, because the deadlines are already in August. In 3 months from now, we don't have due diligence guidelines. As I mentioned, for material to arrive from the mine to a battery, it could take up to 12 months. And then it takes time for the OEMs to understand their supply chain. Some of them are sourcing directly, some of them buying on the spot, some of them are just building new supply chains for the new factories. And there are lead times. There are lead times to secure suppliers. There are lead times to prepare and to execute audits and due diligence. And then there are lead times to actually went through the motion of contracting, of making due diligence, of getting the metals into the battery. And it's just not realistic to expect that it could be done in a month. Right? So I think for me that's one of the biggest challenges and opportunities, because I'm pretty sure everyone in the industry would like to see it more sustainable, more transparent, but also they would like to see it make it happen. Right? So practicality over, I think, idealism and is a very big discussion topic that we'll be very happy to discuss in more details.
No, thanks. Yeah, sort of building on that dream to a goal, sort of practicality and trying to find that. You've touched on a couple of things. Recycling, I think we'll get onto in a minute. The due diligence requirements as well. Absolutely, I think I might touch on that. But I think up front, you mentioned about traceability and how that can be achieved with physical materials, but also challenges with data sharing, commercially sensitive data as well. So, Anne-Marie, I'll turn to you first. Maybe if you can elaborate a little bit more about how you're tracing material from mine, a little bit, and that physical material. But also, I think the main part of my question is more about the request for data and the challenges there and the issues around confidentiality or...
Maybe, the request starts here today. so probably, if you don't mind, I might answer to that question first. I mean,
sure.
I'm sure there are OEM people here, battery people here, and they do ask us about certain things. I'm from traceability point of view, quality, raw material, responsible sourcing, carbon footprint, etc., etc. And we simply pass the same request information upstream. And by saying this, you all know that we buy some from Glencore, but we do request the same information, same request to Glencore, in the form of, most cases, spreadsheet. And you guys work on it diligently and have come up with all the data, necessary information, returned to us, passed on to the original customer. So that's what we are doing. So essentially, if that can be digitally handled, that helps a lot, and that reduces a lot of work. But how can we do that? I mean, how can we control the security of information? These kind of things, I think, that's the real issue here.
I couldn't agree more. And we always seek to answer the questions of our clients.
And thank you very much. I really appreciate the diligentness of Glencore.
But maybe a few comments. I think, this is an obvious point, but the one size fits all is quite difficult sometimes. Even within our own, within my role. For example, when we're responding to clients regarding the material from our own operations in the DRC, I wouldn't say confidentiality is so much of an issue, actually. Yeah. There are operations. We push to be as transparent as we can be. There's a lot of information we can share that's not commercially sensitive. In other cases across the group, there is commercial commercially sensitive information that is difficult to disclose. Even when your counterparty is not a competitor, in many cases it is a competitor, another trader, but even when it's not a competitor, it means you're putting that information out there in the market, so your commercially sensitive information is out there. So that is an issue, a very real one, but not in every case.
Yeah.
I would like to echo the point about the spreadsheets. I mean, at the moment, this is the tool we are using. So I completely agree. You know, this is the role for platforms to help take out that administrative burden and streamline that process. I wouldn't say we're 100% there yet. You know, we have to. Some of the spreadsheets we get are very clearly designed by, you know, OEMs or companies downstream to meet their needs. Of course, that's what their tools are there for. But it means that sometimes as a user, when we look to answer these questions, we think these questions don't make sense. Or, you know, they're not asking the right questions. So there's still some work to do there, and you absolutely need collaboration between the user and the person who needs the information. And I can't emphasize enough this point about practicality as well. You know, in different initiatives that we've participated in around what should be the content of a battery passport, what is the actual data you need to share. You know, sometimes the starting point is, okay, we're going to have 35 different topics, and for this one topic, there'll be 300 questions. I mean, that is just unrealistic. And I'm not just saying that from our perspective. In theory, across the whole battery chain, everyone needs to be answering those 300 questions, times 33.
Yes.
So really, we have to have a very strong practicality focus. And I think, really, manage our level of ambition as well. If I may, Tom,
Yep.
If you like, I can talk about this a bit later. I don't want to dominate, but
No.
in a previous role, I actually designed a chain of custody standard for the jewelry supply chain. And it was great. It was really robust. It was really going to demonstrate, you know, strong levels of performance across every level of the supply chain. And nobody used it. Nobody. So, you know, for this kind of thing to work, really, the number one overriding criteria is uptake. Yep. You need people across every step of the supply chain to use it, and you need enough of them to use it so that it, you know, at the end of the day, the data in the product passport is meaningful. And so, you know, I think this is an overriding argument for looking at low entry barriers, looking at practicality, getting as much critical mass uptake as you can, and then using that vehicle for continuous improvement.
Absolutely. I'm interested. Perhaps this system you designed was very robust, and but that bar was set too high.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, here in the midstream, you're perhaps dealing with competitors as well. So that issue of trust and sharing commercially sensitive data, is there anything you can sort of add to that?
Yes. Before that, probably I should add a bit more to what Anne said. Maybe we too are sounding negative, this whole system, but we are not. The complexity of the whole idea is, you know, we're talking about mine metal down to battery, but it's not simple. For example, I think he mentioned that the practicality of the process, like us, or maybe them as well, we dissolve metal using sulfuric acid, and then we use colossal quantity of caustic soda to neutralize, to produce the precipitized powder product. Those guys, are they sensitive enough in this concept? Some of them are not. And we have to unite them, and we have to drag them into this system as well. That's another challenge. And they don't want to spend any money on that. And this is very, very expensive potential practice. So fortunately, people here, since we have fairly high sensitivity on the nature of this importance, but the whole supply chain need to recognize the importance of this in order for the concept of battery passport to succeed.
It's a big task.
It is. It is. Yes, that's why I'm saying it's whether it could be just a dream.
Yeah. Pavel, yeah.
Actually, I wanted to hijack and piggyback on Hirasan comments about the economic cost of traceability. Right? So I was speaking with a large Western refinery and producers of the PCAM materials, and reality is that supply chain for the battery manufacturing is a continuous process mostly. So dissolving of the metal, it's a smelting, and you cannot just stop operation to separate a batch for a client, bring another feedstock. I think in the OECD report that was published a month or two ago, that they clearly stated that the physical separation chain of custody models are not feasible, just plainly not feasible, right? Because companies buy stock, they arbitrage on prices, they arbitrage in different warehouses and production facilities. They have challenges in the operation, there are maintenance, there are optimization of the outbound stocks, there are blending both of the feedstock and of the output product for the quality purposes, right? So to expect a physical separation of material and physical traceability is putting a lot of economic burden of the companies in the supply chain in a moment when companies are fighting for their life. Like the margins are razor thin, the prices crashed. So the question is, are you fighting for idealistic objective, or are you practically trying to improve industry and helping it to be more competitive? Because one of the promises of the regulation is that with more sustainability, more transparency, implementation of good practices, the company ultimately, the industry becomes ultimately more competitive, right? So the message is that let's not ruin the basic economy of the industry and the supply chain in order to improve somewhere else.
So in that case, you're looking at different models, physical separation, mass balance, this sort of thing to try and sort of address that practicality issue, and I guess also help with uptake generally. You're not being absolute in your approach. Aloysius, I mean, there's been a lot discussed already on this question. Any further reflections on that? But I guess 2 points that I think come up here is around sharing data, so trust, and also that issue about one size fits all and how we address that. So some reflections and then on those 2 points as well would be interesting.
Yeah, sure. So I fully agree with my fellow panelists that it's a really complex landscape, and it's a really there's a lot of different considerations, like I said, between different stakeholders in the entire supply chain. Everybody have their own commercial realities, like Pavel said. Everybody have their, I guess, their different level of accountability to different organizations. So I guess where I can speak from as a person that has dealt with the OEMs, cell producers, midstreams, the level of accountability between the end user, the OEM, to the governance, the regulators is quite different as compared to the level of accountability that is required of, let's say, a midstream to the cell producers, your cathode active material or PCAM to their CAM producer. So that I just want to lay that there's a different context to it. And sometimes when we talk about accountability and what is at the end of it if you don't meet the requirement, right? It's very different if you say that I might have to, for example, the commercial realities that I might have to reduce your orders. That is typically what is the downside of not being able to meet your client's obligations if it's a B2B kind of relationship. B2G, the costs tend to be greater. If things like, for example, and I tell you the most common, I guess the sharp edge of the sword with a lot of regulations is restriction on market access. Even like with what's happening in US, if I'm detaining your goods at the border, every single day where the cars are not able to go to the distributors to be sold to the customers, it's millions of costs that falls on the OEM. So I guess what I'm trying to connect is the considerations across the supply chain are quite different, and hence I think there has to be a common understanding as to why sometimes and we sit in sessions all the time where the OEM cell producers explain these requirements to their midstreams and then translate that upstream. I think what helps to kind of like achieve a common ground understanding is that end of the day, we are supplying along a supply chain. So the reason why there is this order or this revenue that comes to the downstream is because there is this car that is being produced and there's a market demand for it. So if that demand drops, it affects the entire supply chain, like it or not. So I guess that is one of my reflections as to hearing everyone's considerations in the midstream and upstream. In terms of sharing data and enabling, whether there's a one-size-fits-all approach, there is not. And that's the reality of it, there is not. So a bit of context, when Circulor started doing traceability, the first one we did was tantalum, coming from Rwanda, that goes into one of our clients' cars. Back then, we started with physical traceability, like what Pavel was mentioning. And that is through a creation of an app that allows the miners that collects the tantalum ores or deposits, that they bag it, they scan it, and that creates a first physical trace of the material, and then it passes downstream. I would say these days, it's quite different. The way we approach it is we go from downstream all the way to upstream. And it centers all around the concept of traceable mass balance, which I can talk about this all day. It has its fundamental flaws, traceable mass balance, but as of right now, it's the best we have, or it's the best that we can all kind of have a common understanding of. So the way we have tweaked our traceability approach is we try to, let's say, for example, we are being asked to onboard a chem producer or a PChem producer, to maybe put it in the context of for Hiro-san. When we try to go to PChem producer, we understand that depending on which country you are in, where your facility is at, the level of traceability that you have, it is what it is. Some suppliers do not have whether the understanding or the technology infrastructure or even just the manpower to do it. So when we go on site and we do traceability, we try to understand the material flow within that production process. And we assess what are the traceability risks, i.e. materials of unknown provenance. Because if you're telling me that I source responsibility from mine A, I am getting X amount of products from this refiner or this mine, then what we have to prove is that traceable mass balance between the input and output product. That's the fundamental of traceability. But what in the middle part, when the goods come into the factory, gets pushes into the start of production, typically with the refiners, there's a bit of mixing and blending, and then it exits production, gets shipped downstream. The part where, from our experience, where it's the hardest for especially midstreams, PChems and refiners to prove traceable mass balance is the middle part. And that's when we try to tweak our approach to say, okay, if we are not able to provide, for example, granular data in the middle part of it, then what we can do is, because we have gone on site, we've understood the traceability risk. If you have a unique way of managing your inputs to output material such that the risk of materials of unknown provenance entering the production is low, then we could, from a traceability perspective, accept or take a risk-based approach to say that there is traceable mass balance, but obviously there is a process to get to a higher degree of or more concrete level of traceability. And I think that is, for me, the most holistic way to look at it. To give a bit of context, so I'm not saying that everybody should be graded on traceability, but if we are looking at industry standard or what everyone is trying to achieve, let's say the most granular level of traceability is scored 10 out of 10. And when we onboard a certain refiner, miner, midstream, and they happen to be 7 out of 10, from their perspective, I think what we can help them is to say that the industry standard or the industry best practice for your tier in the supply chain is this. Perhaps you can consider doing this. And I think that's the best way to look at how, working across the supply chain, how we can help everybody improve the level of traceability, because like what Hiro-san, it also centers around quality control, not just for ESG purposes. So help everyone improve their awareness of what is the industry best practice and improve the traceability within their own manufacturing process. And that's the way we are tweaking the approach based on our industry experience.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Tom.
Yeah.
May I?
When you go.
Yeah, because I found it very interesting that you mentioned that the traceability mass balance is the best that we have, and I would like to maybe offer some alternative view on this. There are, Anne-Marie mentioned that she implemented chain of custody for the jewelry, right? So there are two standards that are widely acceptable in the industry. Is a copper mark chain of custody, which is applicable to the copper material, and there is a recently published IRMA chain of custody standard, which explicitly mentions that book and claim is acceptable, right? So we are going back to the practicalities and the regulatory intent. So IRMA widely considered as one of the strictest standards in assessment for the mining, and it's a very respectable organization of the downstream producers that should represent their interest. And they are saying that for their purposes, book and claim is perfectly acceptable. Last week during the OECD forum, there was a IRMA cross-industry dialogue, I think, an event on Thursday, right? Then we discussed it with OEMs, with Microsoft, Google, Apple, companies that are also involved in the IRMA. And there were lots of questions about the practicalities and physical traceability, differences of mass balance for quality purposes or for compliance purposes. Because yes, there are some implementation of mass balance for the quality purposes, but the whole concept of quality management at the midstream level, at smelting or at the refining, is that you are blending, and through blending and management of your operational process, you achieve a certain quality standards, a purity and metal content, right? And this inherently involves blending, right? So, and then it puts into kind of, again, a clash between the economic realities, the regulatory intent, and what's downstream is interested in, right? So I'm respectfully disagree that mass balance traceability is the best that we have. I think we can do much more better than that.
Maybe let me just qualify that a bit. What I'm saying is that mass balance traceability is from at least what we see, the most common way to connect between the supply chains. If you are looking at, for example, the refiner stage at the mining stage, compared to the midstream to upstreams, there's different methodologies that can be applied based on the unique processes. But what we are trying to do for supply chain traceability is to connect the entire supply chain and share information with a common way of deciphering and connecting the information. Hence, I agree with Pavel. Like, there's different methodologies that could apply to different types of stakeholders within the supply chain. But from our perspective, traceable mass balance is the best way to connect across the supply chain. Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah.
I was going to try and bring up the conversation to sort of looking at how we can drive sustainability and things, but actually I think the way we've turned here around the traceability approaches makes me think to recycling in particular and recycled material. Obviously the EUBR will require minimum recycled content for cobalt, something like, from memory, 16% by 2031 or
what was that? I don't know.
I think it's around there. But
yeah.
here, yeah, I mean, we talked briefly before about the challenges of traceability and recycling as well, and having a consistent product, so that you can build on that and what you've heard around the traceability methods.
Yes. As you know, when I was asked to join the panel, one of the things that I mentioned to Tom was recycling. So that's why probably you are asking this question to me. You know, as we chatted here, I mean, no doubt about the importance of recycling implementation into the whole processes of battery making, whether from the end-of-life battery or from recycling within our own operation, whatever it may be. And we don't know yet, or if maybe my own ignorance, but we don't know yet the final definition of what European Union talks about recycling, whether it counts our own internal recycling as well, or anything other than that. We don't know yet, but that needs to be defined. But again, what we will be doing, certainly we'll be working with our OEM and battery guys to use what material to recycle, how to process that, and to what content that chemistry is going to be based on recycled material, and some sort of information needed to pass on to the upstream in order to make the chemistry work by mixing with the virgin material, etc. Chemistry needs to be purified enough to cope with that. Again, all those are sensitive information, and we all agree the necessity of that, and we all agree the traceability of that. But again, the question is, how can we secure the sensitive information, confidentiality nature of the parties involved?
And indeed, meeting the chemistry, because that's ultimately the important thing for the battery manufacturer. Is
actually, I don't know. There are some people out here I should ask, but you know, from our perspective, if we look at the chemistry, particularly the impurity level, we believe we can say if it can work or not. But those people, they really want the full qualification work if the battery can be connected to work. So again, it's not the disconnect, but the difference in ideology concept to be in a way solved.
Yeah, absolutely. Anne-Marie, I know it's not necessarily your part of the business, but Glencore does recycling, so if any of these sort of challenges around recycling resonates with you and the business?
Well, maybe I'll comment on the ESG performance related to that rather than recycled content per se, or I don't think I can add. I think one of the big difficulties there is that, actually, this is the same point you just made. There's still an open-ended question, first of all, about the exact origin of recycled material. Obviously, we're talking about a loop. Where does it start? And how far back your due diligence should go, and what does responsible sourcing of recycled material look like? I mean, again, I very much have the practicality hat on here. some people suggest, you should be going all the way back to the original origin, which I think most people would agree is impossible.
Yeah.
So I think that's still a very kind of open-ended question that hasn't been defined, and to think that there are requirements kicking in August and we haven't actually agreed on what this looks like is a little bit worrying.
Yeah. And I think I'm looking at the remaining time and questions, and we could carry on for a long time, but we shan't because I know lunch is awaiting. But I mean, you touch on a great point around the fact we don't know the requirements, and so there is a lot of uncertainty around the due diligence requirements in the EU battery regulation. It's still in draft form. There are calls from different associations, different groups to delay implementation. So I guess, what would be your view on that? What would we want to achieve in this period where there is a delay as well? What we're asking a delay, but for what and for why? Is there any point in traceability without due diligence? Actually, I don't know who to start with. Carry on, Anne-Marie, and then maybe we'll go from there.
I want to answer the last question.
Yeah, sure.
Ever since I did that previous role where I was deciding a standard that no one used, I think it's a very existential question.
Yeah.
And I think, actually, I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say about this, because especially in the jewelry sector, when blockchain came out a couple of years ago, everybody was saying, you don't have to worry about due diligence anymore. Blockchain will solve all your problems.
Oh.
And it hasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, what it is an awesome tool, right? But it's not a solution in itself. What is the point of traceability without due diligence? It's a lot of effort without a clear impact. It's a tool.
Yeah. But you still need to make impact, make change, and have action to change problems where you find them in your value chain. That's what due diligence helps you with. Yeah. Kira, you look like you're about to sort of
no. I mean, simply freeing agreeing with what she's saying. So, yeah, no more to add.
Pavel.
I would like to echo what Anne-Marie said. Even in a EU battery regulation, traceability is not a mandatory requirement. You can do supply chain mapping, you can do due diligence, you can do traceability, and OECD designates traceability as a tool, right? Tool to engage your suppliers, tool to collect the data, to ease the administrative burden, right? To make it easier to share the data across the supply chain. Maybe in some use cases in a more secure way, in some use cases in a more reliable way, or solving some confidentiality issues. But again, the technology is not the answer, and it's not a substitute to due diligence obligations, right? So our role is to help, to optimize, to be a tool, to ease, right? And also, may I come back to your previous questions about the delays and what we can practically achieve, right, in the period when there is a delay for the regulation. I think the core issue is like thinking from the first principle. What was the reason for the delay, right? So the reason for the delay, from my perspective, was that regulation was not very much aligned with, again, practicalities. It's the topic of our discussion today, right? And the targets, the timelines, and reality on the ground did not align. And if we postpone regulation, let's say for a year or for 2 years, in 1 year or in 2 years, we'll end up in a very similar situation, right? So from my perspective, what we would like to achieve is we would like to become more practical, to speak more openly about what's realistic and how we can make progress, right? And what are the priorities, right? So that should be maybe the topic of discussion with the regulators, with the wider industry, about how we learn from the lessons of the past about the blockchain, which is hailed as a savior of an industry and end up being just a gimmick that no one uses. Right? So,
Aloysius, you want to round off this sort of thought and
So yeah, for sure. I think, so to answer the first question, I think traceability supports what you do due diligence on, not the other way around. So you do due diligence on the companies, the facilities of which you have established traceability to. And from my experience, that in a way sometimes limits or makes it more laser focused on what are to help you manage the risk, because like putting from the perspective of the downstream to the upstream, a company like, for example, whether it's Volvo cars, Volkswagen, if you look across, if they map their supply chain, there's going to be hundreds of suppliers. But the idea of traceability is to help with the risk management, to be more focused on where are my risks at. And even though we are talking about this in the context of EU battery regulation, the applications of traceability, like I mentioned earlier, has now been more real in the context of trade facilitation, to help satisfy that you have met certain import requirements. So the way I would answer that question is to say that the traceability acts as a tool to help you have increase your visibility on where the risks in your supply chain are, so that you can probably be more better dedicate certain resources to do deep dive due diligence on certain parts of your supply chain. To your your first question, if I answer the second one first, on what do we do between now and when Omnibus kind of like sorts itself out, for lack of a better way to put this. I think the landscape from our perspective, the landscape for traceability, like I said, we have never been preaching traceability for the sake of a specific regulation, even though it's regulation driven. End of the day, it's about understanding your supply chain, managing your supply chain, being better able to dedicate your resources to where the risk lies. So let me give an example.
quickly. I think we're definitely over time, so let's...
So one of the materials that we have enabled traceability to is mica, and that was for one of our clients. And I shared this with you, Tom. So when the Russian annexation or invasion of Ukraine took place, our customer knew that through traceability there was mica being sourced from Russia. But through this intel that we've enabled through traceability, they are able to work with their suppliers, the various mid to upstreams, to divert the resource to another source instead of Russia. So that was how they are able to use some of these tools to manage the risk within the supply chain. That might not be regulation focused, it might be geopolitical, it might be other things. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Can I add, Tom?
Of course.
This will be very quick. Completely agree. I think next time we have this discussion, it would be interesting to get someone from civil society to share their views, because the way they see, I mean, there's one of the key issues is transparency. And digital product passports are one part of that. And often there's this tension between transparency and practicality. So maybe for next time.
I think it's a great suggestion. I mean, I've got so many questions that I would like to ask, but I want to round off the panel and maybe, raise the mood a little bit and sort of what are the greatest potential wins for sustainability? Just very, very quickly, we've got these tools, we've got this process, where are the potential wins? Just in 20 seconds max.
I'll forego, I had my last word already.
Oh, thank you.
The thing is, whoever he or she may be, I mean, for example, Dinah, if you want to buy a car, you want to be assured that that car is green.
Yeah.
And who proves that? The final car maker. And they need all the information data needed. That's all. Probably that's the goal.
Yeah.
And we need to work on that. And we need to have, system, security, standardization, everything sorted out to achieve the goal.
Brilliant. Thank you. Aloysius.
I think, like what I mentioned earlier, I think the where I see we could get wins over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years is to, from our perspective, help everybody assess where they are at in terms of traceability and work with them to raise traceability standards in accordance with industry best practices, but also taking into account the commercial realities, the data availability limitations, so I think I still feel that traceability is an important tool to understand and enable transparency within supply chains. But obviously we tweak it and we make it a bit more specific to the various environments that different parts of the supply chain operate in. I think that's the best way to move forward.
Right. Yeah. Pavel, over to you.
I think the biggest promise and the biggest potential impact is in building a trust and cooperation across the industry, because industry came a long way, right, in improving, in implementing the sustainable sourcing practices and due diligence, and understanding each stakeholder's unique perspective and requirements and conditions they operate in, and building a trust in this will enable industry to move forward, to be practical, but to improve as well. And,
no, thank you very much. I think, like I say, there's so much to discuss, but we'll have to end there. I think my reflection, you start to hear us saying, is this a dream or a goal? I think the goal is practicality and trust, maybe, and then we can deliver something there. But thank you very much to my panelists for a great session. I think a round of applause. Thank you.